He made me sign everything. The debt notice was taped to my front window, right where I used to hang wind chimes in spring. My name was printed in bold, and below it my own signature, in rushed ink. Like my hand had just come out of dishwater, I froze in the kitchen, broom still in my hand. Nothing moved, not the clock, not the wind outside, not me. It felt like I had been erased from the life I thought was mine. Have you ever signed something just to be helpful, only to lose everything with your name on it? Ruth Ellen Simmons lived in a brick house just off the edge of Berea, Kentucky, the kind of house where the windows faced east, and the backyard smelled like cut wood and old memories. She was 68 years old, retired nurse, quiet, steady, the sort of woman who folded blankets the same way she had when she was 28. Her husband, Douglas Simmons, was 70. He had worked as a local accountant for more than 30 years. Everyone in town knew him as a man who always wore a tie, even to the farmer's market. He handled their bills, their taxes, their bank accounts. Ruth never minded that. He seemed to enjoy the numbers. She preferred the garden. They had no children of their own. Douglas had a nephew who called. Sometimes asked about tax filings and mutual funds, but Ruth had never met him. She mostly listened from the hallway when those calls came in. She figured Douglas knew what he was doing. He always had. Their routine was quiet. Sundays were for church and fried chicken. Mondays were for laundry. Ruth took care of the inside of the home. Douglas managed everything on paper. When tax season came around each year, he would sit at the dining table with a yellow notepad, muttering figures to himself. One morning in April, Douglas placed a thin envelope on the kitchen table. It had no label, no company name, just her first name written in his neat accountant handwriting. He said it was a quick fix for last year's tax filing. The IRS changed something about deductions, he murmured while rinsing out his coffee mug. I just need your signature here. It's nothing complicated. Ruth picked up the pen and signed. She didn't even sit down. She didn't ask questions. She remembered thinking the ink felt faint, like the pen had been used too many times. It didn't matter. She trusted him. That was the last week she saw Douglas. At first, she assumed he had gone to visit his sister. He left a note on the counter back soon. Don't wait up. 2 days passed, then 4, then 9. She called his phone. No answer. She went to the house of his sister in Louisville. Douglas had never arrived. No one had heard from him. Then came the package. A small brown envelope from a credit union she had never heard of. Inside 2 pages, a letter saying she had missed the second installment of a personal loan. The loan was in her name. The balance was 5 digits. There was a warning at the bottom in red ink. She stared at her name typed in all capital letters. Her hands trembled as she reread the date of disbursement, April 17th. 3 days after she signed the so-called tax form, Ruth sat at the edge of her bed, the letter trembling in her hand. That signature, they said it was hers. It looked like hers, but she never opened an account there. She had never requested a loan. She hadn't even held a pen since the day Douglas handed her that paper. At the bank branch in town, the teller printed the file. She flipped through every page, and there it was, the tax form she had signed in April. Except it wasn't a tax form. It was an application for personal credit. The loan had been approved, deposited into a separate account, and emptied within 3 days. The only listed beneficiary was Douglas Simmons, and now he was gone. Ruth didn't cry. She bit her lip hard enough to taste metal. Her jaw locked. The muscles along her neck stiffened as if something inside her had been pulled tight. Her eyes stayed dry, but her ears rang. It was a strange pressure, like she had been submerged underwater without realizing it. Nothing in the bank lobby made sense anymore. Not the soft music, not the teller's voice, not even the sound of paper sliding from the printer. She stepped back, 1 step, like a reflex, like dodging something heavy falling from above. That night, Ruth cleaned the living room in silence. She took the framed wedding photo off the wall. It had hung near the door for over 35 years. She wiped the dust from the glass, then turned it face down and left it on the entryway table. The next morning, she didn't turn it back up. Weeks passed. Letters kept coming. Past due, overdue, final notice. She found out there were other documents in her name too. A savings account that had been emptied, a line of credit that showed multiple withdrawals in nearby counties, all filed with her social security number, all tied to the same week she had signed that one piece of paper. She contacted the credit bureaus. One clerk asked if she had authorized the loan activity. Ruth didn't know how to answer. She had signed, but she hadn't understood. She hadn't known. But the part that broke her most wasn't the money. It was that he had used her name, not just borrowed it, worn it like a mask, spent from it like it cost nothing. Ruth stood in the kitchen one night, lights off, holding the edge of the counter with both hands. The hum of the refrigerator was the only thing that moved. And then she whispered, "I don't need to know why you did it. I just wish I understood why you used my name to leave me." And some betrayals begin with silence, not shouting, not violence, just quiet routines, repeated until they become permission. In Ruth's case, the damage began the moment she stopped asking questions. She thought she was being loyal. She thought that trusting her husband with paperwork was part of love. But trust without knowledge is not love. It is surrender. This wasn't just about one signature. It was about years of letting him speak for her, manage for her, sign for her. Somewhere along the way, Ruth became a witness to her own life instead of the author. The law calls it financial infidelity when one partner secretly misuses money or credit in a way that hurts the other. What happened to Ruth went deeper. It was identity theft in marriage. Her name, her number, her credit all used without her understanding, all legal on paper. Because the man who took it all was her husband, Douglas didn't forge her name. He didn't hack into a bank account. He stood in the kitchen and said it was about taxes. That lie was enough. There are no alarms when a spouse lies, no flashing lights when a husband turns a tax form into a loan application. That's what makes it so cruel. It hides behind the words, "Trust me and don't worry." The law struggles with these stories because they're not obvious crimes. Ruth signed. Her name is on the loan. But what the law now recognizes, and what more women are learning, is that credit fraud against a spouse is real and rising, particularly among elderly women who've stepped away from financial control for decades. The moment Ruth realized what had happened, she didn't shout. She gathered documents. She asked for statements. She wrote down dates. That act alone was a turning point, not emotional, but legal. She was not helpless. She was not invisible. She just needed to reclaim her role in the story, to say, "This debt is not mine," and to prove it, with help from an attorney. Ruth's case fell under unauthorized debt in relationships, a growing category where one partner signs or manipulates finances without clear, informed consent, and though it was her name on the papers, it was his actions that were exposed. The system did not erase her debt overnight, but it paused, it listened, it asked questions, and for the first time in a long time, Ruth had answers. She had signed everything, but now, she was signing for herself. Ruth didn't move fast. She moved steadily. The morning after the last letter came, she placed every paper on the dining table neatly. Quietly, loan documents, credit reports, her wedding license, old tax returns. She took a photo of each one with a borrowed smartphone. Then, she folded them into a large envelope and rode the senior van to a legal clinic in Lexington. There, she met a volunteer attorney who specialized in elder credit fraud. The man didn't flinch when she explained that her husband had vanished. He asked for facts, not emotions. Ruth gave him everything. The first step was filing a fraud affidavit with the credit union that issued the loan. The attorney helped her draft a statement explaining that she had signed a document under false pretenses. She included dates, the handwritten envelope, and the note Douglas left behind. This action triggered a formal review, and the loan was marked as in dispute, which paused all collection efforts. The second step was to request a fraud alert on her credit file. Ruth contacted the 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. With her attorney's help, She added a detailed explanation to her file. Within 1 week, new accounts in her name were frozen, and her credit score was protected from further decline. The third step was to file a statement of unauthorized debt in family court. Though she and Douglas were still legally married, the court allowed her to challenge the financial responsibility for the loan on the grounds of deception. After reviewing her documents and noting the lack of mutual benefit, the judge ruled that Ruth was not liable for the remaining balance. The loan was reassigned to Douglas wherever he was. Meanwhile, the bank was required to report the suspicious account activity. The trail of withdrawals across county lines opened a separate investigation under elder financial exploitation statutes. Ruth was not part of that process. She didn't need revenge. She needed relief. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the credit union. The debt had been discharged. Her record would show the loan as fraudulent under marital deception. She wasn't made whole, but she was no longer being punished. Ruth took down the envelope of papers from her shelf. She slid a sticky note on top. It read, "Completed." Then she started over. She moved to a small rental unit across town, nothing fancy, but hers alone. She joined a class at the public library that taught older women how to read financial statements. She helped another woman file her own dispute. They never talked about husbands. They talked about signatures and what they really mean. Ruth never saw Douglas again. She didn't expect to, but he no longer had her name in his hands. Not on paper, not in silence. And that, finally, was enough. She didn't go back. She built forward. She didn't forgive the betrayal. She outlived it. If you're married and don't know what you're signed on to, open the drawer. Find the files. Call the number on the back of your bank card. Ask questions now, not later. And if you've already been through this, tell someone. Leave a comment. Write it down. Your story might be the warning that saves another woman's name.